All right, so now we're ready to go ahead and start trying to get the scripting stuff working. All right, so here's what we've got so far. I went ahead after the tutorial for the image making, and I went ahead and I added my content management section. There are my large files, medium, small. So I've already generated all of that stuff. Same is true for this folder called scripting. All right, so I went and I pulled some images that I felt like sort of made sense for the scripting area that could be, you know, maybe a background picture or something like that. Now, for responsive design, one of the things that I did, because I'm going to use that one as my testing one to get the script working at first, is I also created, you know, before I showed you that I had those test files. If you want to take a look, there were these things like correlate white paper, and I gave it a false extension of .gif, even though it's a PDF. And then now I've actually got the correlate white paper PDF. And then I created just a directory called empty folder. And then I made a file that had no file extension using TextEdit, and I told it not to have a file extension, just to do as a test. And so I'll provide these for you so that you can use them also as tests. But we can go ahead and dump those back into the large responsive design large folder, because the large folder is the one that we're going to first scan to do the basis of our testing. And that way we can start to write some error testing scripts that will make sure that we don't accidentally grab, for instance, a PDF or an empty folder or something like that whenever we're trying to put it into an image gallery. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. We'll open Dreamweaver, we'll make a new file, and it's going to be a PHP file, HTML5. And I'm going to go ahead here and get started with some PHP tags. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to show you, well, first of all, let's save it so that we know where it's being saved. And we're going to save it into our displayImages function root directory, and I will call it, let's just call it test1. Or we could call it index, whatever you want to call it, but for right now, let's just call it test01. Okay, and now what we've got is, if you want to look at our directory paths here, let's just go and close all of these. All right, so we've got our test1 PHP file. It's in the same root level directory as galleries. So if we were to look and try to look inside of this galleries folder, that tells you, you know, how you would call it the pathway. If you wanted to go and grab an image, you would call galleries / and then responsive _ design / and then large / and then whatever would be in there. So what we want to do is we want to see how we can actually scan that directory. Well, there is this thing in PHP. It's a function called Scandir. Looks like this. All right, and the scan directory, the Scandir function, will do just that. It will scan an actual directory. And so because we know, for instance, that we are in the same directory as our gallery, then what we could do is we could say something like this: // means current directory. But also, we don't necessarily have to do that. We could just tell it to look inside of galleries, and then / and then we decided we wanted to look at responsive design, and then / large, and then /. All right, so that's going to be a string that you pass in as an argument to the Scandir function. And the thing is about Scandir is that I can't just echo it. So I can't do this, because what Scandir does is it gets retrieves a list of contents that are inside of the target directory. And anytime you have, you know, a selection of things, it's going to be an array, right? So we can't echo an array. So what we'd have to do then is do like a print R, okay, on Scandir. So if we wanted to do print R, we need to wrap some parentheses around it. So we'll do print R on the scan directory result of our large folder. Okay, so if I save that, I can go into my browser and I can do a test. So let's go back here and we'll go find the correct folder to look at. And I'm looking in my display images functions folder. I can look at test 01, and then you see what it does is it goes and it grabs a bunch of stuff that's really hard to read. So instead of looking at it like that, let's go ahead and do something where we add some pre-tags around it, because as you remember before, pre-tags will allow us to see things in a better way. So let's go back and do a refresh, and then you see it grabs the list of all the contents that are in that directory. And it also does this thing where it adds a dot and a dot dot. What the dot and the dot dot are recursive, they're basically recursive file system links to the current directory, which is this dot. Remember, dot always means current directory, and dot dot means parent directory. So those are things that if you were, say, in the terminal or in the console where you're just typing blindly and you don't have a graphic user interface, you can use things like dot and dot dot to traverse the directories and go into a current directory or a parent directory. And they will show up when you use the Scandir function because of the way that Scandir gets a list of things. So the other thing that Scandir is doing is it will also grab a list of hidden files. And so you can imagine that hidden files are also things that we really don't want when we're building a list of pictures to grab for being able to put into an array of images. Because if we grab images that are hidden, then they're not going to actually display on screen. And something like DS Store, if you're on a Mac or if you're on a Windows computer and you've copied something over from a Mac, you're very likely going to see this DS Store file, and it's a hidden resource fork and it doesn't really do anything. It's like a little sort of useless database to some degree, and you can always get rid of it. It's just a reference file, but it causes problems for us in what we're trying to do here. So the other thing is you see this, there's that correlate white paper GIF and also that correlate white paper PDF. There's an empty folder, and here's the file that has no extension. Those are all things that we don't want. All right, so if we were to try to actually make those things visible, then we would have a problem. All right, before we move forward, let's just do some cleanup of something though first, okay? Let's do something first where instead of having to explicitly spell out this string like this, let's make some variables that we can use. So first thing I want to do is make a comment, and I'm just going to paste this in so you don't have to watch me type, where I want to create a variable to store the name of the folder where the album of the galleries is located. In that case, it happens to be this thing called galleries. You could name it album if that is easier for you to understand. That's fine. I'm going to keep mine as being called galleries, and I'm going to make a variable that is actually called album, and I'm going to make it equivalent to this. Okay, and I am going to include the forward slash because it's always good to put the trailing forward slash if you know something is going to be in fact a directory. Okay, so that's the first part of it. All right, so that's gone. Now we need to also look at what the target is going to be, because we're going to have multiple, later we're going to have multiple potential target directories. Okay, and again, I'll come down here and make a comment. I'm going to store the value of the current target directory, and that's going to be, in this case, responsive design. So we're going to make something that's actually called target gallery, and we're going to have it equal to responsive underscore design. Now, something that's important is that I'm going to put another comment out here that says later this will be grabbed from a function argument. And I'll just say function arg for argument. Okay, this is just something that's a reminder, and in fact, so will So will this, okay? That's something that's important to remember, and I'll put some space in between so it's easier to read that. So later, this will be something that will become a variable, but for right now, let's just use some paths that we're typing in, okay? Okay, and lastly, we've got this end part that's called large, except for this time, instead of just putting large, let's go ahead and make the full spectrum of all of the things that we might need, large, medium, small, okay? And I went ahead and I pasted this so that you could see, and you can pause if you want to sort of copy this and take a look and think about what this is doing. And so what that means is that now, instead of having to type this out in string format, what we could do instead is we could say that we're going to scan album dot, because we're going to concatenate, all right, target gallery dot, and then in this case we're just going to say large, okay? And let's save it and make sure that everything still works the same way. And if I hit refresh, you see everything is still good. It's still loaded exactly the same thing. But what this is going to allow us to do later is it's going to allow us to piece and part these directories out, because that is going to become really important later as we're building different types of galleries. And I'm also just real quickly going to label this display, let's just do it, display, and I do camel case, so display images function. Okay, so let's say that we've got that now. And that's what we've got to start with, okay? So this is how you can look at doing your scan directory stuff. And what's really important also about scan directory is Scandir is capable, is capable of scanning relative paths, okay? That's really important because later we're going to use something where like just this isn't going to work. It's not going to work out for us. All right, but this is useful for scan directory. And the other reason that it's useful for us to know how to build a relative pathway is also because later when we go to make links to stuff, links are going to want relative pathways as well. They're going to want things that are related to the HTTP pathways versus the pathway that is relative to the actual file system of the server. So right now we're not using the file system of the server pathways, we're using what are relative paths. Okay, and I just highlighted the thing that we're scanning because really there's one more thing that I want to show you how to do, and that is I think that we should be storing this path, album, target gallery, large, we should be storing that inside of a variable, and we're going to call it, I'm going to just paste this and say, all right, store directory to be scanned for contents, and put it into a variable, okay? And we're going to call it image, and then I'm doing capital, so camel case, image list, and I'm going to copy this, actually I'm going to cut it, and I'm going to paste it here. And that's actually the path that we're going to store into a variable called image list. So we're going to take image list, and we're going to scan that directory. Right? And you might look at this and go, why would I do that? Why would I go to that extra trouble? Like I said before, image list, this path is going to be something that we're going to use an awful lot, and it's better to have to just call it image list than to have to, concatenate out all of these pathways every single time you want to use it. So this is a way of refactoring, and by the way, you could scan large, you could scan medium, you could scan small. Honestly, it doesn't really matter because the function that we're building is really dependent on all of these things being populated equally. So, even though maybe medium is something that's going to be used more in all of them, we could go here and change it to medium. That would be okay. And if we hit save and we go and test it, the one thing that is a problem though is that over here in our file contents, we actually only have these weirdo files, these PDFs and empty folders and stuff. We only have them in the large folder. So if you wanted to just make sure that these things are in all of the folders, we could make a copy into medium and also into small. And then that way, when we go to test over here and hit refresh, and it's scanning the medium directory or whatever directory you want, we have all this stuff still here to test with, okay? So that'll wrap it up for Scandir and also how you can piece and part out stuff in concatenation for later use, okay?